Hello, and welcome to our webcast today. We're sponsored by CEEZER, and today we'll be talking about carbon credit confidence, mastering impact, quality, and price in procurement. I'm Margaret Morales. I direct the carbon program here at Trellis Group, and I'm so thrilled you've joined us. So before we start, I have to do the obligatory housekeeping that starts off every webinar. So we're on a platform today that I think is pretty easy to navigate. You actually can move your windows around so that you can look more at the slides or look more at the speakers as we go. In the bottom of your screen, you should see a couple of buttons. One of them will allow you to ask a question. It says Q&A. We will be reserving time at the end of our discussion to take audience questions, so please put them in as we go, and I'll make sure to get to as many as I possibly can before we end our hour today. And there's also a button there for resources. There are a number of research papers there that you can download that will relate to our conversation today. So take a look there. Feel free to download the papers. And finally, I will say that we are recording our conversation today. We'll be sending this recording out to everybody who registered. So you can expect that in your inbox later this afternoon. Oh, and I believe that audience chat is available. So if you want to say something to your fellow audience members, I think there's a button for that as well. All right, without further ado, I am really looking forward to our conversation. I think when it comes to carbon projects and using these projects to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, people throw around the word risk a lot. Often without defining what it is they mean and what are the factors that influence risk. The same as the word quality. I think people use the word quality a lot and often not defined. So today we will be diving into some of those words and particularly what we mean by price risk. And that is the possibility that the price of carbon credits goes up in the future or down. And also delivery risk. And that is that the number of carbon credits a project delivers may be different from what was originally projected. So we will be talking about factors that influence those things and how each of our panelists studies these elements. And speaking of our panelists, I am joined today by three experts who each look at these questions from a different perspective. So we have Carla Woydt, who's the Chief Impact Officer at CEEZER. I have Taylor Wright here, who leads she leads carbon strategy and carbon management at JPMorgan Chase. And also Jennifer Holm, who is a research scientist at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. And she also is a part of Cultivo. She is their carbon science lead. So thank you all so much for being here and sharing your perspectives on our conversation today. To kick it off, I'm going to hand it over to you, Carla, to give us sort of the big picture look at the data that your team looks at when it comes to various types of risk for carbon projects. So let me hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Thanks for having me. Providing a little bit of context. So CEEZER is a platform in the voluntary carbon market, and we work with big enterprises and help them screen, purchase, and manage complex carbon credit portfolios. And we do that by analyzing risk data points. So we make sure that every single portfolio that we're selling is risk balanced and impact optimized. And what I brought today as a kickoff here is to demonstrate a little bit what kind of data are we actually looking at and how complex the voluntary carbon market really is. So if you look at the right side of that slide, you see this big gray ball or bubble. This is all of the carbon projects that exist in the market. And it's depending a little bit what kind of registries you include, but it's around about 20,000, probably more. Then a subset, which is the light purple ball you see here, is the enterprise eligible projects. These are certified under major standards, standards that are either ICROA, endorsed or CCP eligible. And here we're looking at 9,000 plus projects. And this is really the pool we are sourcing from. Then a subset, which is the light purple ball you see here, is the enterprise eligible projects. These are certified under major standards, standards that are either ICROA endorsed or CCP eligible. And here we're looking at 9,000 plus projects. And this is really the pool we are sourcing from. And in this pool, I'm now moving to the right-hand side before I talk about the little blue bubble on the left. In this 9,000 project pool, we have all of the data that you see on the right side. So we are talking about 10 different registries, all of which are coming with a lot of different methodologies for different technologies. We define 12 project types, but each and every single project types has, again, different technologies in its category. We look at 13.5 million data points for the projects, for the 9,000 projects, and 3.5 million data points just on project quality. And what CEEZER then does, and now I'm going back to the right, to the left side, out of the 9,000 projects, we vet really only a handful, around 150 projects currently, that we find eligible to select for our buyers' portfolios. And out of that pool, we then receive buyer requests that have certain eligibility criteria, and based on those criteria, we would select a defined portfolio. So the funnel for every single project really becomes smaller and smaller. And for every project we're selecting or we're vetting on CEEZER, we collect another 400 data points. So it is a lot of data in the voluntary carbon market. And we do recognize that this is impossible for every buyer to screen, digest, and then use for the purchasing strategy. And this is what we are helping with. So we cluster all of those data points in different risks. So we look at the holistic risk profile of a project. And then within every single risk category, we would look at specific data points that drive the risk for a project. And to give you a little bit of context on those different risk categories actually are, you see here on this slide that we had an additional one that I'm going to talk about in a second. So we look at the host country risk, and the host country risk is actually the risk that is based on the project location. So what are the policy landscape? What are the political conditions in a host country? What are the development opportunities, and what is the geopolitical risk of a project? And we are looking at the delivery risk. So how mature is the project technology? And what is actually the project developer track record and expertise? Did we see any delivery delays in the past or even delivery failures? What is the in-house team? Does that project developer work with NGOs or entities on the ground? Then we look at quality risk. And quality risk encompasses the additionality. Is there an overcrediting risk? What is the risk of reversal? What is the leakage risk? What are environmental risks beyond carbon? And what are social impacts of the project? And then we take all of these criteria and we map it against, and what is the price risk of a certain project? Because ultimately, this is what our buyers want to know. So how safe is the project? What is the risk profile of a project? But also, what is, based on an optimized risk profile, the best investment option for me as a buyer? When we've done our vetting process, we have a very clear picture of the project against its peers. And this is what we're doing as an additional step. These are inherent risks in the project type. We define specific risk drivers for every single project. These risk drivers per project against peers. So how does a project actually perform against peers in the same category? So we help to really make every single carbon credit project comparable in every single risk drivers. So we benchmark, the benchmark then encompasses 13 dimensions across geopolitical and double claiming risk. We look at 7 dimensions across project developer and project maturity risk, and 16 dimensions across main quality categories. And this is an example for biochar. The quality categories can vary based on the different project types as well. On top of that, we help our buyers to define mitigation strategies. So we do see that our buyers are willing to take some risks and are really risk averse for other categories. For the risk that our buyers accept, we would draft mitigation strategies. So do we have a pool of equivalent replacement credits? Are the credits that you're selecting insurable? So even if there is a delivery failure, is there some insurance that could step in? So to wrap it all up, what do you do to mitigate risk and how can you draft a robust carbon portfolio strategy? First is do define the metrics you want to look at. So what is quality for you and what are central risk drivers that inform your own due diligence? And then based on that, craft a specific purchasing strategy that also takes into account market developments. And if you then put both on top of another, you can build a portfolio based on the data that you receive. And once you have that portfolio, make sure that you don't leave it as is, but monitor it over time to make sure that new scientific insights are factored in, that new market regulations or even new market developments will always be reflected in an update of that portfolio. And having said that, I'm happy to hand over to Jennifer, who will give a perspective from a project developer in what risk means and what are the data points that you are looking at. Jennifer, over to you.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much, Carla. That was wonderful. That was great of really setting the scene of things, major topics around risk and quality that we need to think about. As Margaret mentioned at the beginning, I'm coming here with kind of two hats on, which I'm very excited about. On the one hand, I'm a research scientist working a lot on carbon climate feedbacks at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and then also at a project developer company that's working in the voluntary carbon market space that mostly focuses all on just nature-based solutions. So my next couple slides I'll be going over is kind of taking more of a deep dive into how can we ensure high quality carbon credits and de-risking of different nature-based solutions. And I really like to show with this kind of bar graph figure on the left from this Grissom et al. Paper that really shows the climate mitigation potential of all these different natural ecosystems. So how much CO2 equivalent that we could pull into natural forests, into agriculture and grasslands, and into wetlands. And you could really see the high mitigation potential that we have in things like reforestation, things like, biochar, different kind of wetland restorations. So these are all great opportunities that are just, ready to go now. The ecosystem has been working at pulling in carbon for us for a really, really long time. So we just would really like to give nature a leg up. But then also on the right, you see that there's these 8 different areas that we could have for improvement to really make sure we have successful nature-based solution projects. Things like having more accurate baselines, trying to make sure that this removal of carbon is additional. We think about safeguards for the community and the land. And then some of my next slides, I'm going to be focusing on a little bit more about durability and permanence. So, this is also kind of taking a case study looking specifically at REDD+ projects. At Berkeley, I've worked with the Berkeley Carbon Trading Project, where we did a large report looking at the natural risk assessment of REDD and specifically looking a little bit more at durability. So just a reminder, what is durability? This is the estimated permanence of the carbon that can be sequestered. And sometimes this is over just the lifetime of a project, which maybe might only be 30 years, but we would hope for it to be longer, that a project lifetime can be 100 years permanence and durability. So a lot of my kind of work as a scientist is I also look at what a lot of natural risk can be to these ecosystems. So what's the risk of wildfire or pests or droughts or other disturbances, and how might that affect carbon sequestration potential? And these bar figures that you see at the top, that was all the natural risk that was reported by 57 REDD projects, where they had an average of 2% risk. And we compared that to the bottom green bar down at the bottom using remote sensing. We found that the average risk of all of these plots and sites and red sites are actually 28%. So there's this underreporting of risk that's out there, which also translates into overcrediting. So we'd like to try to get better quality of that. And then just really fast, the bar figure all the way on the right shows the breakdown of how projects reported their natural risk into these 5 different categories. And really the main thing to focus on is these blue and green bars, where out of 57 projects, a lot of people say there's absolutely no risk at all to fire or pest or extreme weather, where in reality, we know that there is. So a little bit of just some of my work that I do is, I try to look again at this natural risk assessment, where this global map that you see over on the left is showing the percentage of stand clearing disturbance in all the red spots of where there's a percentage that over 100 years of this, durability lifetime, that there will be a stand clearing disturbance or disturbance shown by fire. So you can see that there are spots all along the tropics and subtropics. And so to try to help really kind of improve the quality of these carbon projects, we're starting to really use tools like these vegetation ecosystem models that are also coupled with climate change. So we've been studying this for a long time of how forests are impacted by disturbances, fires, climate change. But now these tools can really be used in the voluntary carbon market in a really new, unique way to help us have better predictive understanding and really kind of account for carbon accounting in different parts of these nature-based solutions. So this is just kind of a schematic conceptual overview of what some of these models do, where they will track carbon throughout every kind of carbon pool of the ecosystem and help us understand changes in permanence and in durability. So that was a little bit more on the sciencey side. I hope that was okay that we took a little bit of a science deep dive. And now just kind of also reiterating some of the things that we do at Cultivo. So we really do understand the importance of on-the-ground partnerships and community connections. So it really takes a full ecosystem to regenerate an ecosystem. So we have a lot of collaborations between different groups where we talk a lot with local landowners, local stakeholders, and communities. Plus, we realize that there's a big importance of having strong investors to really help with our financial viability of projects. And just like Carla was mentioning, there's so much data points coming from these projects. So we really need to try to understand how all the data can be synthesized and used in a better way to really help us do these initial assessments of different projects. And certification bodies, of course, are very, very important. They're really critical to help us understand that we ensure to the standards and rules and better transparency. And then, we partner with a lot of people on the ground, different NGOs, different project implementation partners to make sure we're regenerating nature and earth as best as possible. So we kind of don't really focus. We do have a large pipeline of projects, but we don't focus on trying to expand as fast as possible, but really have higher quality for the projects that are there and lots of just on the ground iteration with stakeholders. This is just kind of a quick slide of some different issues that kind of we encounter of really making sure that we do have high quality nature-based projects. So these are some kind of key hurdles, that we hope to overcome, where there is kind of these lack of projects out there. We really need to make sure that we try to put in as much money, as much resources as possible to try to kind of help save and preserve our natural ecosystems, and try to kind of unlock these finance routes to try to get the finance in there before the credits are even issued, to help make sure we understand, what is the risk, what are the needs. And then kind of some of these different things that you see. It is a slow and expensive process. Sometimes the market is fragmented. And then, unfortunately, we've seen some issues in the past where some things are a little socially unjust. So, at Cultivo, we have a huge social team and a social framework team to really make sure we're doing the best that we can to safeguard communities and making sure their livelihoods and everything are taken into account, and making sure that there's a constant iteration back and forth with local community and local stakeholders. Oh yeah, I kind of have one more case study of just an example to show of just kind of really the importance of high quality MRV. And again, MRV really kind of helps us understand how the project will be monitored over time, and what kind of are critical techniques that we could use to monitor. Is it a combination of ground measurements, satellite imagery? What's the cadence and the frequency of different monitoring? And this is kind of one example that we have in improved forest management projects in Mexico, where improved forest management is really shown to help a lot in these ejido communities in Mexico that are communally owned lands that are very, very good stewards of the land and of their forests. So we have projects where, like I said, we do go down on the ground, kind of work with different local stakeholders and help really kind of monitor their forests. So we were able to fly this drone over their forests that had a LiDAR on it, which really helps track the individual carbon and biomass of the forest. And this was just a great local partnership, and it was a good, really cultural and knowledge exchange of really how to improve sustainable forestry practices. So this is just, kind of this on-the-ground work that we think is highly critical. So this is my last slide, just kind of leaving us with some kind of thoughts of things to think about, of just some really important due diligence and de-risking that Coltiva will go through. So kind of all these different steps. We first want to have really good initial assessment to really try to understand and screen different areas and really try to forecast their natural capital potential. And then we go through all the verification kind of standards that I was talking about, making sure we adhere to these sustainability standards and things that meet the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. And then, we try to provide this expert guidance. So experts, scientists, and also financial experts to really try to help investors along the way. And we've decided that also co-design and co-development is very important. We are a project developer, but there's many other implementation partners that are needed. Kind of back to that, it takes an ecosystem to regenerate an ecosystem. And diverse portfolios are very important, trying to get a little bit more and more diverse of different nature projects. I think I might leave it here. And that was, I think that the end of my slides.
All right. Thank you both so much. That was an excellent setting of the table here for our discussion. Thank you also to everybody who's sending in questions. These are great. I will try to weave them into our conversation and make sure we get to the rest in our Q&A. So please keep them coming. But now I'd like to dive in with some questions of my own. And I want to start with talking about delivery risk. So Jennifer, you gave us an interesting overview of, specifically for nature-based carbon projects, factors that can affect delivery are like wildfires, pests, etc. Taylor, if I understand right, JPMorgan Chase buys a variety, carbon credits from a variety of project types, including nature-based, but also tech-based projects. I'm curious how you think about delivery risk across your whole portfolio.
Hi, everybody. Yes, and I'm happy to touch on that a bit. But first, maybe just helpful, a little bit more background on my role at JPMorgan. I lead our operational sustainability work. So first and foremost, focused on reducing the environmental impact of JPMorgan's day-to-day operations. And then once we done all we can in the year to reduce those emissions, we are looking to address our unabated emissions with high quality carbon credits to further support the growth and the development of this voluntary market. And so my team spends a lot of time thinking about building a really robust, diverse portfolio of carbon credits that hopefully are going to deliver the credits that we need to achieve our goals. And so as we, that word, a diverse portfolio, I think is really key here, especially when you're thinking about potential delivery risk, is making sure that you are bringing in not only different project types from the the three main buckets that we think about, which is nature-based, hybrid, and engineered. But even within those categories, making sure that you're identifying different project types in different geographic regions, because ultimately today, you can really only understand the delivery risk at the project level. So you really have to get deep in the weeds when you're doing due diligence on a particular project to understand what unique risks that project faces, and ensuring that you're building other things into your portfolio, other projects into your portfolio that don't have the same risks, so that you're not imbalanced as you're thinking about your potential delivery risk. There's also contractual mitigation methods that you can build as a buyer into your agreements. Where, for instance, you can look at having the supplier commit to providing replacement credits from another project that they own, or helping you source additional credits within the market. We don't have an insurance product today, but those are evolving and becoming more available. So in case a project is unable to deliver, you can also leverage tools like that. And so I think there are, I would say, new and more emerging opportunities to help buyers navigate the potential delivery risk. But I do think, first and foremost, trying to build a portfolio that can avoid some of those challenges in the first place is hopefully where buyers will start as they think about delivery issues.
Thank you. And I'm going to follow up on that, Carla. You talk to buyers all of the time, and you're advising them how to mitigate risk on delivery. And so Taylor mentioned a couple of strategies like contractual tools, but I'm curious how you advise them when it comes to delivery risk. Like, what is the tool they can use to build a portfolio that'll help them manage that risk into the future?
Yeah, it really all comes down to kind of drafting a robust strategy and also use data. So what we do when we put together portfolios, we really look at the individual deliveries of a project or a project developers. Have there been, for many of the newer technologies, there might not have been any prior deliveries. That is already a risk, to be quite frank. It's not a exclusion criterion per se, but it's something that increases the risk profile. And then when it comes to your strategy, it's really all about looking at, okay, what do I have in my portfolio? So you would definitely to some of the credits that have a lower delivery risk, where they are spot available, they are issued under standard, so they are technically now available. You can purchase them, and the likelihood of delivery in time is really, really high. And then you would mix them with some projects where delivery risk might be a little higher, but then since you already have a couple of credits with a low delivery risk, this might balance out, right? And then for those that have a higher risk, you might look at what are the mitigation options. The mitigation options is, so you're choosing a more nascent technology type. So what are the replacement credits available for that project type? So what could I use if this project really cannot deliver? So there are a couple of angles that you can use, but it all comes down to you have to know what you want to buy. You have to know how your portfolio looks like. And then based on that, you have to really have a clear line item strategy and a visibility over the clear risk profile, and making sure that those risk profiles really balance each other out.
Okay, thank you. We got an interesting question from the audience in the Q&A about whether there are anticipated shortages in carbon credits, particularly for future years when we might expect a lot of companies to start retiring credits, 2025, 2030, et cetera. Jennifer, you mentioned a lot of factors that could affect delivery from nature-based projects. Do you have projections about those factors in the future that could influence supply of nature-based carbon credits?
Yeah, that's a great question. Potentially, it's yes and no to that. Is that on the one hand, that the amount of funding and money that have gone into nature-based solutions is still very, very, very low. I don't know the exact percentage, but it's, well under like 10% of the potential that could be there. On the other hand, there is also, this land grab that people talk about, is that we only have a finite amount of, land space, ocean, things like that. And that there is, a trade-off of making sure we have the right food security as well. So we're have enough agricultural land, cropland, but then also enough land to try to keep it restored as nature, try to regenerate nature. So I guess the short answer is that right now we still have a lot of room to build and room to grow and places to restore nature. Eventually there will kind of maybe be a cap, but that's not until like way far in the future from now. And then we could help really just strengthen and bolster the existing environments that we do have now too. So I hope that answers that.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious, Carla, you're looking at the data from thousands of projects in the carbon market. How do you think about potential shortages in the future based on delivery risk? And could that influence price risk?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it certainly does. So we look at different our price projections per project type. I think most of the projections are pretty explicit in predicting a supply shortage for tech removal supply from 2030 on, and certainly then in the years up to 2040, when many of the companies just reach their net zero target years and they want to counterbalance their residual emissions or unabatable emissions with permanent removal. What we already see is that many of our buyers already move from a portfolio that might have had a larger share of avoidance credits to a larger share of removal credits and even removal-only portfolios. And looking at the prices of many of the tech or durable carbon removal technologies, still they do choose a high share of nature-based removal, which is yet affordable if you compare it to many of the tech removal project types. So we see that these prices are increasing, and whenever we start drafting long-term portfolios with our project developers, all of them also work under the assumption that prices will increase. So we see if you engage now, you can secure supply. So there might be shortages also driven by demand, but there are also expected price increases. And the earlier lock in the prices by engaging in long-term offtake agreements, actually the better conditions you can get, and the more you can really control the price increase that you have to take in the future.
Okay, so now Taylor, I'm going to turn to you because I imagine you're managing a budget to help reach climate targets at JPMorgan Chase. How do you think about potential changes in carbon credits in the future and how that influences your day-to-day decision-making?
It's very challenging. I'm actually just working on our budget right now, and without a crystal ball, it's impossible to know where the prices of these things are going to go. Our expectation broadly is that the price of engineered carbon removal come down and the price of high quality nature-based go up some. So we have that assumption built in to how we're thinking about that, and it's reflected in how we think about our portfolio mix. But I would say one thing that's been interesting that we're monitoring today is that there's actually a demand issue. There's been a number of first movers in this space, large corporates who have made a commitment and have already started buying. But we haven't really seen that second wave of buyers in the market, and that's stifling a lot of projects, both on the nature-based side as well as the engineered removal side, from being able to grow and start to build a pipeline for to meet that future demand that we expect to see when a lot of these corporate commitments come due. But that's why we have been an active participant today, because we know that if we want that supply to be there at a reasonable cost, as we expect to buy additional carbon credits, the investments need to be made today to allow companies to grow and scale in the engineered space, to allow nature-based projects to actually be developed and to start to produce credits. A lot of, for instance, reforestation and afforestation credits take time to produce. Obviously, trees take time to grow, and those projects need a little bit more lead time. So I think that's one thing today, too, to be considering if we want to see a market where there's ample supply across a variety of project types at a reasonable price. We do need there to be more participation in the market and really focused in on the ones where we think they're going to be high quality credits in the years to come.
Carla, I'm curious if you've similarly observed hesitancy among carbon buyers or prospective carbon buyers that you speak to, and sort of how you advise them on that.
Yeah, I think it's exactly what Taylor said. It's the second wave of people investing larger scale in engineered removal is something that is lagging behind a little bit. Our buyers, we see that buyers are moving in that direction, but just more slowly than we would have expected. And since they are kind of ramping up their portfolio, they just increase, let's say, step by step, right? So they don't have the large scale investments that we would have invested. And this is also what we hear from many of our suppliers, that exactly at the moment, there is a lack of buyers, a lack of demand to in order to facilitate this growth that we need. However, what we do see is we saw a little bit of a dip in the last year, and we do see that buyers are coming back. So we are really hopeful that this will ramp up. However, yeah, I mean, I can only second what Taylor said. It takes a little more time, and we really do need this investment to make sure that we have supply once we reach our net zero target years.
Okay, I'm going to back us up a minute. For a question for you, Jennifer. You mentioned a lot of factors that can influence delivery of a nature-based carbon project. I'm curious what third-party certifications or standards you look at or you think are important to pay attention to when a buyer is evaluating a nature-based carbon project.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you. Well, at least just the certification bodies, kind of the standard ones that are out there, like CAR, Vera, Gold Standard, ACR CARB, like those are all, I think, very important. They are needed to try to make sure we have the right rules and standards applied, and better transparency. But then also there's additional kind of third-party bodies, CCB, like the carbon, crediting, or excuse me, now I forget exactly kind of what that stands for.
The core carbon principles? Is that what you mean?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and then also just kind of different integrity councils and things like Corsica that are out there that are really good at making sure we're thinking about higher integrity, making sure that there's not kind of the greenwashing. I think I saw that in one of the Q&A questions out there, that there is like a lot of potential for greenwashing out there, which is unfortunate that that's been there in the past. But we're really trying to improve standardization, transparency, so there isn't greenwashing of companies. And then just like Taylor was mentioning with JPMorgan, it's great that they are just trying to address these unabated emissions. So doing everything you can first to really lower a company's emissions first, and then trying to also go on and use the voluntary carbon market to help address these unabated emissions. This kind of segues a little bit with your question, but another thing that might be good to consider is transitioning from offsets to just the contributed world too, where investors, NGOs, companies are just contributing, finances and money to try to help give these technologies more of a boost, to give carbon removal more of a boost, instead of just offsetting your emissions that might not be equivalent. So the contributions approach is still kind of a little bit new, but that might be an interesting path forward.
I agree. Yeah, the conversation about contribution approach is really, I think, heating up, and a very interesting reasons on both sides to pursue that or not. Oh my word, we have so many good questions coming in the chat. So I'm gonna now just move us to audience questions. And I'm gonna start with you, Carla. There's a really interesting question here about when we talk about delivery risk. Are you referring to a risk that a project would continue delivering carbon credits in the future, like an established project? Or is it a risk that an early stage project does deliver at all?
It can be both. It can be both. So for established projects, there is what Jennifer actually pointed out at the beginning. There is like the natural risks that could lead to a discontinuation of an established project. But also looking at new issues, we've seen a lot of quite severe delays from the registries. This is, of course, not the fault of the project developers. That has many reasons, also with the registries becoming more rigorous. But nevertheless, we've seen that there is a delivery risk if it's an established project, but it's a new issuance, for instance. But then looking at early stage projects, of course, there is inherently a bit of a higher risk because this project hasn't gone through a certification. You know, the experience with all of the processes, with everything you need in place before you can actually sell or deliver credits, is just nothing that had been done before. So I'd say inherently the risk for early stage project is a little higher, but we also have seen delivery delays and even failures for established projects.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies that question. And I have a follow-up for you, which is about political risk or legal barriers within certain country contexts. Do you have a process for evaluating those for specific projects?
Yes, absolutely. We look at the host country. We look at the general political landscape, but then also at the carbon credit regulation and the landscape around carbon credit regulation. So this is something that we look at for every single project per host country. We look at the NDCs, inclusion in the NDCs, any risk of double claiming. So we are really looking at the host country and at the project in a specific host country.
Okay, so that's legal and political risk. But now this is a science question for you, Jennifer. Somebody asked in the Q&A, when you say 100-year duration for a project, does that mean it's 100 years of absorbing carbon, or that it'll take 100 years before the absorbed carbon goes back into the environment? Can you describe that?
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, it was the first one of that. It's 100 years absorbing carbon. So luckily our natural systems, are pulling in CO2 for us. So we want that system to still be there the whole time for 100 years of actively pulling in carbon. And it's hopefully over 100-year time period that there won't be a risk of reversal. That there won't be some type of deforestation or fire or illegal logging that takes your portion of your carbon credit and kind of removes some of that. So the 100-year permanence is 100 years of pulling in CO2 for us. So yeah.
But then it's possible that after that 100-year, the forest may stand even longer.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, we're hoping that, it could even be much longer, that 200, 300 years, where it gets a little bit into permanence. That's kind of the natural permanence, but then there's also permanence of just landholders and legal land tenure right or political risk or things like that. So we try to have all the right kind of understanding of land tenure rights, and so that forest or ecosystem or wetland or grassland or soil, is protected that whole time.
Okay, thanks for getting into the science there for a minute. Carla, I want to go back to something you said in your remarks at the top of our call about risk. And I'm curious if different buyers have different risk appetites, different ones you speak to. And if so, if you could give some examples of how various buyers you speak to understand that word risk differently and how that influences the type of carbon credits they're looking for?
Yeah, we do see that. Let's say one buyer type, I call it now the more traditional buyer type. They start, or they are used to buying spot credits, mostly in the avoidance space. And then what we see very often is when we start working with them, we work on a diverse portfolio, including removal, also ramping up the share of removal. But what is just learned for them, so something they are used to, is that they buy carbon credits on an annual basis. They want to include it in their sustainability report or any other kind of reporting. And they are just really averse of delivery risk. So they want to make sure, I want to have my credits at a certain point of time. And then we have the buyers that are a bit more experimental, let's say. So they really start, they have a full removal portfolio, for instance, or they really start investing in engineered removals. So their risk appetite for delivery risk, like they have a higher appetite, if you will. So they are not as risk averse. They don't really care if it's coming in January or in September, because this is the risk that they are taking. And they are more on the, like their mindset is rather investing in something and helping an industry scale. So it's not really about reporting. It's not really about, it is about compensation. It's about counterbalancing residual emissions in many cases, but it's a bit more of a long-term view where they start buying now and then they can account for their emissions also in the longer run.
Very different risk appetite, that sort of buyer who's trying to stimulate a market versus a buyer who has a carbon neutral commitment and they're meeting that every single year. And it could be the same buyer who's doing both.
Absolutely. Yes, we see buyers who also have different portfolios for different scopes of emissions. I think I've seen one question in the chat. So we would pre-align on 2 or even 3 different portfolios for every scope. And then one is more on a removal side with a different risk profile than one that is pre-aligned for their supply chain scope 3 emissions, for instance.
Okay, so then I want to take this to you, Taylor, who is actually making these decisions. And specifically, we got this question from the audience. How do you value price versus quality? I think a lot of times, well, first of all, what does quality mean? But a lot of times people think of those as a trade-off. And I'm curious how you sort of view that conversation, price versus quality.
So I'll start by saying there is not yet one definition of quality in the market. And so it's been left to many of the different stakeholders in the market, buyers being the primary one, to figure out what quality means to them, and being really clear on that when they're out in the market trying to procure credits. We actually published a paper called our Carbon Market Principles as we were getting more active in the space, and felt like it was very important to be clear and transparent on how we were going to assess quality. I will say these criteria are not by any means groundbreaking. We leveraged the ICBCM, so the Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Markets, the Oxford Principles, what Carbon Direct and Microsoft did. We looked at all of these different existing standards in the market, and again, did not reinvent the wheel, just sort of re-articulated them on how we were going to use them to guide our own purchasing, as well as the work that we do with our clients in the carbon markets. And so there's certainly today, I will say, there's not necessarily a direct relationship today between price and quality. I've worked with the group Calix, one of the rating agencies, and I know Donna, one of the founders there, has often quoted that when they started doing these reviews on projects, they identified that actually some of the cheapest credits, some of the industrial credits, are actually showing, using their methodology, some of the highest quality, because they are really strong from an MRV perspective. You can track and measure the impact that those projects are having. And so, all that to say, I don't think there's necessarily a direct correlation today with price and quality. And there are certainly really good projects in every project type, and there are bad projects in every project type. And so you do have to, again, get down at the project level and conduct diligence to feel confident as a buyer to purchase any carbon credits in the space today. And so I think that's to keep in mind. Just because it's something that costs a little bit more doesn't mean that it will necessarily provide any reputational protection, or that project's more likely to deliver the actual carbon removal that it says it's going to do. So again, you have to rely on the data, as Carla has articulated, to feel confident in purchasing today.
I love that you brought up Donna Lee from Calyx, because I think she does posts on LinkedIn that she calls like the ugly duckling projects. And they're the kind of projects that you don't hear about, but have very high greenhouse gas integrity on their rating scale. And it's really cool because, they're not the poster children carbon projects, but there are so many types of carbon projects out there that we probably don't talk about enough. So, all right. So I'm going to go back to more questions in the chat. Carla, this is a question for you. And the question is, how can smaller organizations that don't have the capacity to invest in large purchases or offtake agreements to scale high quality credits still help increase transparency and quality in the voluntary carbon market?
Well, yeah, that's a brilliant question. I mean, first of all, I think we, like all of our discussions we're having, are based on the assumptions that companies have to compensate their emissions, right, on a ton-for-ton model. That is actually something that is easy to account for. But if a smaller company cannot afford this and yet wants to invest in more expensive engineered removal credits, then there are also different approaches and different accounting approaches for that, right? Which can be on a kind of ton per revenue model. It can even be just, this is my budget, and I believe in, let's say, biochar as a technology. So I want to put that budget in biochar. So give me the best projects, or the projects that match my operations or my locations, entities in my value chain. And I want to find a project that fits kind of my strategy based on the budget, right? And that doesn't necessarily have to be in a ton-for-ton model, right? How do you increase transparency? Just provide transparency, make transparent what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what are also your kind of restrictions. And I think we see a lot of companies who report nothing about their carbon credit purchases. I do understand where this is coming from, but I don't necessarily think this is what creates a lot of transparency and even kind of a shift in mindset. I think it's an absolutely fair approach to say, this is what we have, this is what we can work with as a company, this is what we're willing to spend, and we spend it on high quality carbon credits, whatever this means, because it is true what Taylor says, there is no one definition of high quality. Every project has, let's say, we call it low risk aspects and high risk aspects, and then just define what you want to buy and why you want to buy it, and just make transparent what is your strategy around it. And I don't think that anyone could rightfully say, okay, that's not correct, because you just did based on your strategy. And I think this creates transparency. And it's really valuable to see different approaches from different players in the voluntary carbon market, whether it's on the buy side or the supply side, or the enablers and standard setters.
And I think that defining your internal values, your purpose for working in the carbon market, that and therefore defining what quality is, I think that can be the most time-consuming part of the whole process before then you go out and look at what's in the market and do due diligence on projects. So
absolutely,
I think that can't be emphasized enough. So another question, Carla, that I think you may have some insight into is what size companies do you find typically require a portfolio with these different types of projects versus a company that maybe just needs to choose one project and purchase all of their carbon credits from that project? Is there like a point where you're like, oh, this is big enough to merit looking at a portfolio?
Well, we do focus on larger enterprises where the portfolio approach comes quite natural, but also many of the sectors we have as buyers have a relatively high volume of emissions and a relatively low revenue per ton, right? So looking at the industrial sectors, it's just a lot of emissions. And then if you kind of calculate the revenue per ton is relatively low. So those companies simply cannot invest in a full engineered removal portfolio at the moment, right? Because it would be millions and millions. And then they are really working towards it. So they are working with their finance departments, with their CFOs. Very often the CFOs are part of our discussions and making sure that they kind of work towards a budget that makes it realistic. But in those industries, it is very, very common and almost the default case to really start with the diverse portfolios and then, according to the Oxford principles, really increase the share of removal over time. And also work with price projections, right? Really using kind of the models and the projections that they see in the next 5, 10, 15 years to make sure they choose the right timing to engage in spot credits and long-term offtake agreements and wait until they start their first purchase.
Okay. I just add to that I don't think, you should think about diversification connected to the size of the portfolio. There are so many ways to access credits today, even at, individual credit, getting access to individual credits, that the diversification strategy is really just to mitigate potential risks that any one project, could face. So, even if you are building quite a small portfolio, having diversity as part of it, I think is just, it's more about the strategy that you're deploying in your carbon purchasing. But I think diversification is important regardless of the size of or the number of the credits that you're purchasing.
Okay, we have just a couple minutes left. So I have a final question I'd like to hear from each of you on it. And my question is, when you think about the next 5 years and how the voluntary carbon market could make a real contribution to climate action, what is the most important thing a carbon buyer could do to making sure that the voluntary carbon market really influences how much carbon we're emitting into our atmosphere or pulling back down from it? And Jennifer, maybe you could start from the nature-based perspective.
Yeah. I mean, I almost want to just shout out from the roof. I'm like, buyers, just buy more. Like, we just need to, I'm kind of excited thinking about the next 5 years. I think hopefully there will be a lot of growth, a lot more buyers buying into projects of all different types. Like, I know that I kind of focus more on nature-based solutions, but I think it really is all hands on deck of technology-driven projects. I mean, different things with biochar or advanced weathering or deep geological sequestration. We kind of need this large portfolio, like we were saying, this large diversification. And right now, I mean, nature already is our best technology. It's doing this for millennia, so we can invest in nature-based solutions now while we improve other technologies like potentially DAC or BECS or other things. Yeah, and if we invest in nature-based solutions now, that helps bring up the price, the quality, kind of all of that. I guess I'll kind of reiterate on something that I kind of said before in my presentation, that I just think there is this really strong focus that needs to happen on partner capabilities, this on-the-ground partnership with stakeholders. That's something that's critical to really kind of make these projects work, make sure that they last, make sure that, all the different nature ecosystems are doing what we want them to do. Sorry, that was a little bit long, but yeah, no, I'm excited for the next 5 years.
Those are great takeaways. Taylor, do you have a short comment? What do you think is the most important thing a buyer should do in the next 5 years?
I think send clear demand signals. I think we've tried to do that by saying, for instance, for scope 1, we're going to be looking to get 100% of that covered by permanent engineered carbon removal. And we've said what that looks like, what from a ton perspective, what we think that's going to look like out into the future. That helps companies in that space understand that there is going to be demand in the coming years for that particular credit type. And so I think if more corporates can be really clear about what their future demand for carbon credits is going to be, even if they're not buying them today, that will help address some of the gaps that we have today, and the anticipation that there will be a supply shortage.
Okay, thank you. And Carla, last word from you. What's the most important thing you want buyers to do?
Yeah, well, without reiterating what already has been said, I think the science is clear. So we have to start now. We have to do all we can at the same time, of course, reducing as much as we can, but just in parallel, invest in carbon removal technologies. And the best the buyer can do is really look at the data, set your strategy, and then just start. And even if you start small, it just helps, and it helps an industry to scale. So I would say just get going, put your shoes on now and start running, because we need it. Yeah.
All right. I love that. Put your shoes on now. Thank you all so much for joining in this really fun conversation. I'll just reiterate again, there's a number of resources that anyone can download if you're interested, including some research from CEEZER on assessing carbon credit quality, and a REDD+ quality assessment report. So some interesting things in there. And as I mentioned at the top, this conversation was recorded, and we'll be sending it out this afternoon to everybody who registered. And if you ever want to watch it again, all of the Trellis webcasts are available anytime on trellis.net. So thank you all so much for joining. Thank you for the folks behind the scenes who made this all the tech work for us. And I look forward to seeing you all in a future conversation. Have a great afternoon.